This thing will kill those Xenos even if they're hiding behind a wall. Let's talk about the Space Marine Whirlwind and how to field one in your army. Hello and welcome back to Auspex Tactics. Today we're continuing Tank Week. I'll wander through the track-based motor pool of the Space Marines. In this video we'll be going through the rules of the Whirlwind, how to buff it up to have it perform as strongly as it can in your army, and how we could run it on the battlefield. The Whirlwind is the light artillery vehicle of the Space Marines, often deployed to areas where there's overwhelming hordes of Xenos or heretics. Sometimes it can be helpful to strim out those numbers before they reach the battle line. They can be armed with either Vengeance rockets, which are high explosive missiles, or incendiary Castellan rockets that bathe the foe in liquid promethium. The Whirlwind is one of the units that's really caught my eye since the new Codex dropped, so let's take a look at its rules. The Whirlwind is a heavy support choice for Codex Space Marines, weighing in at 80 points if you give it the Castellan rockets and 85 if you give it Vengeance rockets. It has the same stat line as the Predator with a movement of 12 inches, weapon skill 6 up, ballistic skill 3 up, strength 6, toughness 7, 11 wounds, 3 attacks, leadership 8, a 3 up save, and it will degrade when it gets to 5 wounds or less, with a movement of 6 and a ballistic skill of 4 up, and then when it has only 1 or 2 wounds remaining, it will only have a 3-inch move and a ballistic skill of 3+. At base, it's only equipped with its Whirlwind missile launcher, which we'll take a look at now. The Castellan launcher has a 72-inch range, it's heavy 2d6, strength 6, AP nothing, damage 1, and as an artillery weapon it can target units that aren't visible to the bearer. This one is your choice if you're aiming to go after light infantry, particularly the sort who like to cower on objectives far away from the vengeance of your Space Marines. Secondly, we have the Whirlwind Vengeance launcher. Again, this is 72-inch range, so the enemy won't be able to outrange you on the battlefield. This has a heavy 2d3 profile with strength 7, AP -1, and damage 2, and again it can target units that aren't visible to the bearer. Now this profile is better at taking out medium infantry, or putting a few extra wounds on a hard target, particularly medium tanks, or perhaps even aircraft. Basically anything toughness 7 or below is generally a decent target. Both of these weapon options will be highly boosted if you put the unit in Devastator Doctrine to get an extra AP -1 on the shooting. That Castellan launcher will be strength 6 AP -1, which will help it dig enemy units out of cover just that little bit more, and the Vengeance launcher will go to AP -2, so that can really help it crack through the slightly tougher armour on the targets it will likely be facing. In addition to its main armament, you can also choose to take a Hunter-Killer missile for 6 points, and you can choose to add a Storm Bolter. I choose to use the Hunter-Killer missile if you're using Master Artisans, or you're planning on keeping this guy within reroll range of Captains, Chapter Masters and Lieutenants, and I'd pretty much always take the Storm Bolter unless you really need those 2 points for something else. It has the Angels of Death rule, giving it access to the Bolter Discipline special rule, Combat Doctrines, and Shock Assault for what it's worth. It might explode when it dies. If you roll a 6, then every unit within 6 inches suffers D3 mortal wounds, and it has smoke launchers that frankly you'll almost never need to use because this thing won't really ever be short of a viable target. Out of the two weapon options, the Castellan launcher and Vengeance launcher, I think that they're both actually really well balanced. I would happily run either on my Whirlwind. The Castellan launcher is very good against troops which might be out of line of sight on a far-flung objective, or it can just be used to add an extra bit of firepower to whichever troops unit you want to try and thin out with your Space Marine gunline. The Vengeance launcher sacrifices a few shots, so less light infantry capability, for an extra pip of AP, extra pip of strength, and extra pip of damage, but then it does also cost 5 points extra. This thing can quite happily shoot at almost anything in the game, as nothing really wants to eat too many mid-strength, mid-damage, mid-AP shots. The main advantage of the Whirlwind is obviously that it can target units out of line of sight, and combined with its incredibly long range means that you can add a few extra wounds to whichever target is most pressing for you to deal with on that turn. The damage profiles on the weapons aren't necessarily as massively impressive as some of the other options in the Codex, but just the reliability of repeatedly being able to target the most pressing threat on the battlefield each turn is very, very powerful. So let's move on to looking at a few ways that we can improve the Whirlwind and get the maximum potential out of it. Firstly, as usual, we'll look at chapter traits, and with vehicles, as usual, Iron Hands reign supreme. As Hicks Up Feel No Pain, better Overwatch, slower degrading, reroll ones, likes to be in the Devastator Doctrine, and gets to move and fire with heavy weapons, is a very potent combo. I've already seen these cropping up in tournaments in Iron Hands lists, which certainly says good things about them from an Iron Hands perspective. Ultramarines are also good for being able to move and shoot in the Tactical Doctrine, and to fall back from any enemy deep strikers that might tag this thing in close combat. Raven Guard or Stealthy successors will be able to give it a 2-up save, as the Whirlwind will want to loiter at the back of your deployment zone, far out of 12 inches of the enemy. Salamanders is very powerful, particularly on the Vengeance Whirlwind, for those rerolls of high quality shots, and also if you take the Hunter-Killer missile. Crimson Fists is worth considering for +1 to hit against large horde units, which the Castellan Whirlwind will often find itself firing against. And Imperial Fists can be particularly good on a Whirlwind because it will often be firing at units within cover, letting you really punish those Camo Cloak scouts or similar. The Whirlwind is a pretty decent unit for receiving character support, and you could easily put a Captain or Chapter Master and a Lieutenant next to a trio of Whirlwinds, safe somewhere towards the back of your army. If you're playing with Iron Hands, I could conceivably see this thing being used as part of a bubble with Iron Father Phyros and the Ironstone, perhaps along with a Repulsor Executioner or two sitting at the back of your gun line. In terms of stratagems, the Whirlwind has its own unique stratagem, which is Suppression Fire. For 2 command points, your Whirlwind or Thunderfire cannon that hasn't moved that turn can be chosen to fire with again. So I believe you have to do this when you first choose the Whirlwind to shoot with. It is quite an expensive stratagem for 2 CP, but if you really need to just pile on a few extra wounds on a unit that's hiding out of line of sight, or maximise your damage done to a light vehicle, then I could see the value of it. Obviously the stratagem will be a lot more valuable if you're using other units to buff the Whirlwind, say if it has sources of rerolls, or is in the Devastator Doctrine, or is getting +1 to hit or wound from anywhere. These are all factors that make the stratagem stronger because they make the Whirlwind's base shooting stronger. So how would I actually run a Whirlwind myself, and how would I play it on the battlefield? As I said before, I'd quite happily run it with either the Castellan or the Vengeance missiles. I could see both having their place. I'd probably err on the side of the Vengeance missiles myself, just because occasionally you might well be fighting an army that has very little or no troops at all. To optimise the Whirlwind, I would think about either the Iron Hands, or a successor chapter with Master Artisans to get those lovely rerolls, and Stealthy to give it a 2-up save. I'd deploy the unit at the back of my army. The 72-inch range means it has no real need to be any closer, and the further back it is, the less likely your opponent is going to be able to tag it in close combat. I would make sure it's adequately screened with my other units. I strongly consider buying a Captain and or a Lieutenant if I had a significant amount of backfield shooting units and cluster my tanks up around these guys. From there, your main decisions with the Whirlwind are about target priority. You have to weigh up the amount of damage you expect your Whirlwind to be able to do, and dedicate your firepower to where it will most help the game. It might be more useful in a game to help destroy the enemy damage dealing units, or if you feel you have a bit of firepower to spare, it might be worth trying to roast a squad of troops that is holding an objective in the enemy's backfield and is going to be racking them up points all game. It is good to have that flexibility, however, so you can decide this yourself. Now the Whirlwind's main competitor in Codex Space Marines is the Thunderfire cannon that fills a very, very similar battlefield role. Now there's a bunch of positives and negatives that the Whirlwind has over the Thunderfire cannon. It's a lot more durable, it's a lot more mobile, and it costs a few fewer points. But the Thunderfire cannon arguably has a better damage output, in no small part due to having a 2-up ballistic skill. It's a bit easier to hide out of line of sight, and it has access to its own unique stratagem called Tremor Shells, which has the potential to be very powerful but does cost CP, and weakens the unit's firepower. I'll hopefully be doing a full review of the Thunderfire cannon next week, but overall I'd say there are decent arguments for taking either the Whirlwind or the Thunderfire cannon, depending on the list and what you want out of the unit. Overall, I'd rate the Whirlwind as a highly competitive choice for Codex Space Marines. Shooting that ignores line of sight is so important to have in the list, as it can make the difference of a ton of victory points if you're not able to shift one last on an objective that the rest of your big guns can't see. I fully expect that we'll be seeing them in many competitive lists, and I'd be certainly happy to run one or more myself in a Space Marine army. If you've had any experience yourself running Whirlwinds, please let us know down in the comments. It'd be interesting to know how they're getting on in the real world. As always, if I've missed anything important or I've made any errors in the video, please let me know down in the comments. And feel free to subscribe for more Space Marine videos, which certainly should be every day for the next few weeks. Tomorrow in Tank Week we'll be looking at the Rhino and Razorback, the armoured personnel carriers of the Space Marines. Thanks for listening to Auspex Tactics, and I'll see you in the next video.